Big. I'm with GigHome Research. I'm the research director for cloud, focused on the cloud vertical. I have a distinguished panel here. We'll be talking mostly about hybrid cloud, but we'll talk about on-prem, public cloud, and a bunch of different topics, including open source. So we've been hearing for a long time that tape is dead. If you ask that to the storage guys, they will tell you this tape would never die because it serves a particular purpose. It's very cheap with all of its drawbacks. Tapes are still alive and kicking. Same thing with mainframes. That mainframes are dead, and there are lots of companies out there still using mainframes. So we've been hearing for a while that everything is going to move into the cloud. For the most part, it's true, but for some applications, it's never going to happen because of privacy concerns, compliance concerns, or even performance reasons. Some applications will always stay on-prem on the enterprise data center. So that would mean that there is other workloads will move into the public cloud that would give birth to something called hybrid clouds. Hybrid clouds is a reality. They're here to stay for the foreseeable time. So today we're going to talk about all the different platform approaches from on-prem to public cloud. And before we do that, I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves. So we'll start from the far right. Nate?
I'm Nate Gordon. I'm Director of Technology for AppCore, and we help service providers build clouds based on Apache Cloud Stack.
I'm Ermanno Bonifazi. I'm the CEO of Solgenia, and we build a cloud management platform to provision and meet our application on the cloud.
I'm Paul Turner, CMO at Cloudian. We build a hybrid cloud storage capability that you can deploy on-premise in your data center, and it can automatically tier to the cloud. So you get on-premise data and cloud data all managed together under one seamless storage interface.
I'm Dave Peters. I'm the Manager of Systems Integration at Esri. We're a software development company for mapping and GIS throughout the world. We've been in business since 1949. And we're here to talk about moving to the cloud and the ArcGIS Online capabilities we have to allow our customers to leverage the cloud and stuff as part of their overall ArcGIS platform.
My name is Derek Tumalak. I'm the Vice President of Product Management at Vormetric. Vormetric is a data security company that protects information at rest in traditional enterprise environments as well as cloud. So if you need a single platform for protecting that information, that's something we provide.
I'm Roberto Medrano, Executive Vice President of SOA Software. We're a product vendor. We sell products for lifecycle management, for developing your services and APIs. We do runtime. We have an API gateway for running your APIs, securing your APIs, managing and monitor driving policy. We have a portal for promoting your APIs in the cloud to other people to actually use it. And we have a cloud integration gateway for integrating your applications into the cloud.
Thanks, everybody. And as mentioned earlier, my name is Ashar Beg. I'm the Research Director for Cloud at GigHome Research. So cloud is best described as a journey. Some applications, as I mentioned, will stay on-prem. Others are moving into the cloud. And most enterprises, unless they are very small businesses that don't have any IT department to begin with, they start moving certain workloads to the cloud, and then gradually over time they move other workloads. So I mentioned about hybrid cloud earlier. So my first question is, in no particular order, for Paul Turner. Paul, what are the key attributes for hybrid clouds?
Well, I think the key thing that people need to look at for hybrid clouds is one, it starts at the application. We have to build something that's compatible application interfaces so that you can have the same application ecosystem being able to run on-premise as in the cloud. Because what you want to be able to do is be able to have that portability where you can move not just your data but also your applications. And I think the second then is you need to have an ability to manage data movement. So you've got that ability of how do I stream data up to the cloud, but more importantly, how do I pull it back? And I think eventually we'll get better at brokering clouds so that we actually know where we can place data, I think, more efficiently. And then I think the third is this management side. And I think that's the piece that's really poorest right now, because we've got good ways of moving data. I think there's application compatibility interfaces are getting much better. But I think in management interfaces, that's the piece that I'd really like to see. Hopefully in the industry we'll get better at managing how do you actually broker and manage interfaces between on-premise and the cloud. But I'd say those three aspects.
Thanks. Since this is such an important topic, and this is the core of our conversation today, I'm going to ask two more panelists to describe the key attributes of hybrid cloud. So I'm going to go to Dave. Dave?
Yeah, I think as Esri has taken a big investment in the cloud to build the ArcGIS Online Cloud software as a service as part of our core platform. So all of our desktop applications, server applications within the enterprise interface with the cloud the same way they interface with the data center. So we've kind of built that interface with the cloud. Another exciting part about the cloud technology is we've been able to take data, base maps, schema, applications and stuff, and make those available to everybody from the cloud to enhance their organization, bring the organization into the cloud itself, and also a content management system to support security, to support organizations in the cloud to be able to publish services, publish web maps, and then make those maps available to every device in every area. So as a vendor, we've invested heavily in the cloud to make the journey to cloud transparent to the customers so that they can take advantage of the cloud directly with their investment in GIS.
One of the primary things that I get asked about now that we're entering the mainstream adoption phase of the cloud, for the past few years, cloud was primarily bottoms up, mostly line of businesses. They felt that the cloud could be much faster for them to deploy applications or have certain platforms that will take them much longer on-prem. One of the things that get asked a lot about companies that are actually moving into the cloud, they realize that all of their applications are not working the way they were supposed to, or the way they used to work on-prem. And now integration is one of the biggest challenges. In addition to that, it's data migrations and so on that come into play. So my question for Roberto, who represents SOA Software and knows a little bit about that. Roberto, can you shed some light on the challenges that most organizations face when they start utilizing the hybrid cloud, which is a mixture of public and private?
As our name implies, SOA Software, where service-oriented architecture is one of the principles. If you have your applications services-oriented, it's going to be much easier to use the cloud and much easier to divide your services to where you want to run them. We've been doing a lot of private side at first, and now the public cloud is becoming even better. So we see issues like security, for example. We see issues like where you put the data. We see issues like geography. What's the geography side? So it's mostly how do you architect your applications? Where is the agility that you want to do? How do you want to run them? And then what products you use eventually to do all these different considerations on the cloud. Cloud integration is kind of a new concept and an old concept. If you have service-oriented architecture in your principles, then using APIs will be much easier to connect everything, to secure everything, to integrate everything. If you want to use adapters or connectors like the old way with the ESB, it's going to be very hard because you're using the old legacy side. So most of the people that are using those technologies have to move into the no ESB or the cloudless, adapterless, or connectorless infrastructure that people need. It'd be much easier to do that in the cloud with cloud integration gateways that only have the real things for them to use, the mediation that you need, the orchestration that you need, rather than a heavyweight approach with the old ESBs.
So we talked about migrations, integrations, security. Another aspect of hybrid clouds is something called brokerage or cost management. So I'll ask that question to Nate at the end of this panel. Nate, can you shed some light on the brokerage and cost management aspect of hybrid clouds?
Sure. I mean, when you're looking at a hybrid cloud, scenario, you have a whole, host of choices to pick from, and a big part of that is managing your costs. AWS has can have a very complicated cost model associated with it, and so you need to be able to manage through that process and be able to know, am I going to get the best value for my specific workload out of that platform? And every platform is going to have a different cost basis associated with it. And hybrid cloud adds more layers to that when you start talking about running on-premise equipment as well. There's a certain CapEx cost to running your own infrastructure versus maybe a dedicated instance or a spot instance in AWS. And so with brokerage being in there, you can actually then kind of do some cost forecasting, predict out a little bit more about where your workload might work best. In say a 3-month window or a 6-month window, and be able to have a little bit better guarantee about your costs and control those costs down the road.
Thanks. So now we have a European panelist on this panel. Their company does cloud management. So my next question is for them. It's what is the right platform option when you're looking at is it on-prem, is it colo, is it cloud, is it depends? What's the criteria that we use or select for the right platform option?
Oh, I believe that selecting a platform, especially on the cloud, may depend really on your needs. So there is no single solution there is no one-size-fits-all. That's what I mean. So it depends really on the needs that you have, meaning on security, privacy, the size of your business, so what you do. I believe that anyway there are platforms like the one that we are building right now that are able to connect to various kind of cloud systems. So you can have your on-premise system, or you can deploy your application on a private cloud model, or you can deploy application even in a public cloud model using all the infrastructure provided that are right now on the cloud, like Amazon or Azure. Or you can have the hybrid cloud that I believe in Europe it's very big because there is a lot of concern about privacy. So people want to use application on the cloud, but at the same time they want to keep their data on their own premises. And this is exactly something that it's very big, and we're allowing them to do that. So I believe the response is it may depend.
So as I mentioned earlier, cloud started off as a bottoms-up movement. Line of businesses started adopting cloud. And 2013, last year, we saw a top-down approach where CIOs wanted to take charge and take control of total cost of ownership and really getting a handle on the expenses and so on. So they wanted to distill down to a short list of 3 or 4 cloud providers that the company would be using. So things like manageability, control, visibility really became very important criterion. So my next question is for Derek. Derek, how important are these things that I just mentioned, manageability, control, and so on, in the in hybrid cloud?
So, the way we view, I guess, security and compliance from a cloud perspective is these are enablers, particularly going to the public cloud. What we've seen is that organizations want to be able to maintain the same controls, the same access policies, whether that information or that data lives on premise or it moves up into the cloud. And in fact, what we've seen is that people take that much more seriously moving into the cloud, because at least when data lives in traditional on-premise infrastructure, presumably they have more control over it because it's their own employees and so forth. But when information moves up into the public cloud, who has access to that data now? What type of visibility do you have? Who's touching that information? So that becomes a big challenge, and from what we've seen, becomes a very big enabler for organizations to adopt security and compliance solutions. And just as important, being able to make a decision to shut down one of your cloud solutions or service providers and decide, hey, I'm going to move over to another one, or take it back on premise. So obviously very important and a very big enabler.
I'd like to kind of jump in here. I think what you're hearing from all of us, hybrid cloud is this kind of nebulous thing that we've been talking about for a while. And it isn't just about having services that are up in the cloud and some services that are running locally. But what you're seeing is more vendors like ourselves are trying to abstract the cloud. We're trying to make it so that within the storage layer like us, You actually are using the cloud service and you don't know it. It looks the same. You're looking at compatible interfaces. You're looking at Esri, who are going and building apps that actually use cloud services to complement what they have already in their existing product. And I think that's what's exciting about this is we're kind of changing the way hybrid cloud is. We're building it into product. We're building it in so that we can do brokering better. We're building it into storage layers. We're building it into app layers. And I think that's what's different.
So are you saying that cloud is not a replacement for on-prem data centers? Rather, it's a complementary?
Oh, there's huge benefits to it. I mean, just think about distribution of content, right? Just think about how we move data around. Think about how, CloudFront from Amazon, I can actually now have edge services, provided. There's a whole bunch of benefits to having the cloud, whether it's archiving and backup, whether it's distribution, or whether it's using other services that may be up there, or analytics as a service. So ideally what you want to do as IT company, as developers, we want to make it easier so that you get to use all of those advantages. You get to use all those features. And that's really, I think, the exciting part of where we're going.
I think when I look in the cloud, what's the cloud? It's really a deployment model. So when you're looking at applications, where am I going to run my applications? You start with the architecture first, and then you figure out which one is the right way to run it. Or if you're going to buy a SaaS application, if you're going to buy it from out there. But reality today, the best applications are the ones that you don't know where they're running. And they could be extension of your data center, whether it's private, public, all these things. We deal with about 300 of our Fortune 1000 customers, and they're very large guys that have a lot of stuff in the back end. They have application teams, and they're always thinking about what's my architecture. And after the architecture is where I'm going to run it. In the old days, people used to try to figure out, am I going to do .NET or Java, or am I going to run it on a Microsoft versus Linux? Now the conversation is, where's the best place to deploy this?
If I may add something, I believe there is no conflict between the on-prem and the cloud. Cloud is just another option that CIO now they have. So it's something that, as he said before, it's an architecture design. So I'm going to build this application, and where I'm going to run it, on my on-prem, on the cloud, on a public cloud, on an infrastructure on the cloud, it's just another option that they have. Probably what we will see is the convergence between the way of managing applications. So the way that you will manage your application on-prem will be probably exactly the same the way you manage your application or provision application on the cloud. But it's just another option, in my opinion.
Yes, as a vendor, we really see the cloud as an opportunity to do things we couldn't do on-prem, and it's kind of extending the whole data model, extending the GIS from an internal type application supported on workflows and published by professional GIS users and supported within the organization to building a whole content management system in the cloud, sharing data in the cloud, sharing security, sharing groups, and developing communities so that we can actually use GIS throughout the organization in a software as a service type application, to be able to do geoprocessing, to be able to do network analysis and stuff at the business level rather than depending entirely by IT or by our organization itself.
Actually, Dave touched on something very interesting because there is doesn't matter which research survey that you pick up from either GigHome Research or any other research firm out there, the primary driver to moving to the cloud is always an economic driver, like CapEx versus OpEx, and then cost savings and so on. But as you know, those surveys are typically responded by IT admins who and CIOs almost never respond to surveys. And I happen to spend a lot of time with those CIOs. I'm actually going to be in New York meeting about 150 of those guys tomorrow. And the answer that you get from them is it's all about agility. Cloud provides them the agility to launch applications, launch workloads much faster than they could do it on-prem. And one of the trends that we've seen lately that kind of emerged within the last 6 to 9 months is a lot of companies are using cloud as as a DevOps type of environment, a non-production environment where they can spin up workloads on varying platforms relatively quickly. And then once they're fully baked in the cloud, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months later, they move them back on-prem for security, performance, and compliance reasons. So Dave kind of alluded to that in his response. That brings me to my next question, which is how can the ability to gateway into public cloud services help your business? So I'm going to go to Nate at the end of the table to answer that question.
Sure. So, I mean, we're talking about, hybrid cloud, with on-premise versus, the public cloud and AWS kind of things. One of the, core features of a true hybrid cloud, I think, a solution for that would be, that you have a consistency across. And so it's enabling you to have a consistent, deployment model. And that was also mentioned, that it's really, we're talking about, how do you deploy things? How do you think about things? People talk about DevOps a lot. There's a lot of varying terms of that and varying buzz around that. But I look at that not necessarily from specifically an application developer perspective, but enabling operations teams to make smarter decisions about how they're interacting with infrastructure, and to be able to interact with on-premise infrastructure and the VMs running there and your public cloud VMs and public cloud resources in a very similar fashion, really enables you to do very dynamic things and be able to have true hybrid cloud capability to be able to shift workloads out into those public resources quickly, because all at that point it's the same model for both locations. It's just a matter of I decide that workload A goes to public or workload B goes to on-premise, and it's very fluid and very responsive to that agility that those executives are looking for, I think.
Roberto, go ahead.
So gateways is kind of an interesting word. We use gateways for API gateways. We use cloud integration gateways for people that want to integrate to the cloud. And services has become the main thing. Whether you're going to do this on the cloud, you're going to do mobile, on REST services, you're going to do IoT, it's all services. So you're going to need a gateway no matter what for all those things. So for us, we take the gateway as the primary controller to onboard stuff on the cloud, or to connect things in the cloud or ground to cloud.
Excellent, thank you. My next question is for Derek. What are the pitfalls about data migration to and from public cloud? We talked about this as being one of the biggest concerns to moving to the cloud.
Sure. So in many ways, it comes back to what we talked about earlier, maintaining control of your data. For example, let's say you have sensitive or toxic information that's moving from your on-premise environment up into the cloud. What can you do to ensure that as that information moves up into the public cloud, the same controls are in place, the same visibility in terms of who's accessing that data is also in place? So that's really the biggest challenge with migration is maintaining those same controls. And of course, as you move from potentially one public cloud provider over to another, those same considerations come into play. At the foundation at a lot of this is really encryption is a good enabler, an excellent enabler, in fact, for sending information to the cloud, because if you maintain your key management on-premise and ensure that your keys that unlock that data are only used under certain circumstances, effectively, once you take away those keys, the cloud provider really has just encrypted information at rest, which renders it useless. So you can take that data, move it over somewhere else, and ensure that essentially the data that lived in cloud provider number one, for example, is destroyed.
Thanks. And key escrow management really comes into play because even a rogue employee within a service provider environment should not be able to access your data because they don't have access to your keys. So the vendor solutions that provide key escrow management should be something that you should consider.
Yeah, one of the challenges with moving databases to the cloud is the latency and stuff that's involved. You have to move the applications and the databases to the cloud and have more of a restless state where it's able to perform and scale within the cloud structure itself through a stateless type connection. Otherwise, latency and those kinds of things can cause huge performance problems.
Excellent point. My next question is for Dave, since you got the mic. what is the right approach for building the cloud infrastructure? What are the things that you should be looking at, since you do that for a living?
Yes, basically what you need to look at is performance and scalability, and I think we mentioned earlier the transparent capability to users to be able to access the cloud naturally, the same locally as it is on the internet. Recognizing some of the advantages, the bandwidth connectivity to the cloud, the ability to have unlimited bandwidth and unlimited scaling. For some applications, that's very important. For us, the ability to share base maps with everybody in the world, imagery with everybody in the world. We need that bandwidth. We need to be able to support hundreds and thousands of queries an hour and have that scalability. One of the most exciting things that I see, though, is the whole changing in the business model, the collaboration and sharing and standards in terms of getting everybody on the same schema and everybody on the same base map so that we can share our data, and then a security role where we can establish groups to communicate and share our content either within our organization or with our users and with our partners and stuff in a secure way.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of jump in on this kind of movement of data, movement of objects. I think more and more what you're going to see is the challenge with storage. We're a storage company. The challenge with storage before now is it used to be in kind of this block-oriented format. So what you have is this very unstructured, this very not a descriptive piece of data. And I think what you're seeing is object storage is going to be the means that we start moving data around, because when I move data off-premise, I've got to have a lot of metadata with that data that describes what it is, what I'm going to do with it, what my base maps look like, how I want to distribute it, who should access it. And so I think what you're seeing is the object layer, and we're just at the beginning of object storage. The object layer will become a way to broker data both on-premise and in the cloud and move data that still has metadata and that is open, so that any interface, it's not tied into one particular vendor. And I think that'll be interesting. And then, of course, you have security and encryption, so all data comes in, it's under your access and your controls, but you also know what that data is in the cloud, you know what applications can support it. So I think that's a second piece that I wanted to add.
My next question is, Paul, it's actually for you. Since the Edward Snowden the thing that happened about 2 years ago, and data privacy and data localization, a lot of countries are passing laws around the data about my citizens cannot leave my geographic boundaries, as well as concerns around data privacy in general. Can you shed some light on that aspect of cloud, and what's being done, and what are the different approaches, and where are we going to go from here with those concerns in mind?
Well, I think a huge aspect is encryption. And I think wherever we move data, it'll be encrypted everywhere. And most importantly, it's under your key control. I think, as you mentioned, it's not under keys that are given to you by whoever the cloud provider may be. But also for some companies, that won't be enough. I'll want it to be within my particular region. If you look at some of the big cloud providers, they may only have one data center for all of Europe. And I think what you'll see is more and more companies will want to have certain piece of data that they actually have complete control of. It's within their data center. And maybe over time, they will move that up to the cloud when they can be sure that regional conformance will be guaranteed by the provider. But up to this point, that's not the case. So I think people definitely, where it comes to HIPAA compliance, and there's a lot of concerns about that in terms of movement of data. You look at the big Visa and card companies who have a set of security standards, and generally most cloud providers. So there is sets of data that definitely people will run on-premise. But then, of course, backup and archive where that's fully encrypted may be okay to have offsite. And those things, I think we're going to get better at these blended ecosystems.
But if every cloud provider is going to build a data center in every geography or country, wouldn't that increase costs?
Well, it certainly will, and that's where I think a lot of people will implement their own. It'll be their private, at least enterprises. Smaller companies will probably be comfortable enough with everything being in the cloud, but enterprises already have very good data center infrastructure. It connects to their own sites really well, because they generally have a couple of big data centers they need to feed data around, and they'll use the cloud to complement that. So I think you'll see more and more people will implement, but it'll be cloud-like services. The way I interface to it the way I run my app ecosystem, that will look more like a cloud service. And I think that's the big
Go ahead, Derek.
Yeah, I would echo that comment. I mean, we have a number of customers internationally, even up in Canada, over in Europe, and they've made demands of some of our cloud partners that they set up data centers in each of those respective countries because of data cross-border issues that they run into. The other effect that we've seen also is competitors to some of the U.S.-based cloud providers establishing themselves in certain countries. You mentioned Edward Snowden, and just the trust factor. It's a U.S.-based cloud provider. Is that an issue? And so you see investments coming in from governments and so forth.
Yeah, one of the hello. So one of the concerns that one of the very strong countries that is about data privacy is Germany. They really value their citizens' data, and that privacy kind of supersedes any other concerns that doesn't matter if it's terrorism related or any other service providers coming in or government coming in with subpoenas and so on. But recently we've seen Iceland emerge as one of the almost like the Switzerland of managed services as well as data haven, because the laws in Iceland are very favorable to data privacy, and they would not even honor subpoenas from the U.S. Regulatory bodies in terms of providing access to that data. So we've seen that shift. When I talk to CIOs, there's many of them are considering Iceland as the place where their data, and also the location, it's between the two continents. So that's something that we've seen emerge within the last 4 or 5 months. So I'm going to change topics just slightly and talk about open source. There hasn't been more acceptance of open source, at least in my lifetime, than what we see today. So, and specific, I want to talk about OpenStack and what kind of disruption it's causing in cloud and enterprise infrastructure. So I'm going to start with Nate at the end of the table, if he can shed some light on what kind of disruption OpenStack is causing, and where do we see this happening, and how does that play into the big picture of on-prem versus service provider infrastructure?
Sure. So, I'll admit I'm a huge open source supporter. I have been for a long time. But, I also recognize that there is a place for commercial software. There has to be a balance there. And I think, more and more enterprises are becoming comfortable with open source, and you look at things like the Apache web server. It's probably the most prolific web server in existence, and it's open source. There's a lot of tools out there that have been created that are driving a lot of innovation that are open source, and not all of them succeed, but not all commercial software succeeds. So when you look at something specifically like OpenStack, I'll admit I support more on the Apache Cloud Stack side. There's OpenStack and Cloud Stack, but I think they both have their place. OpenStack in and of itself is a toolkit. It's a toolkit for building a cloud yourself, and as is Apache Cloud Stack, maybe through a much simpler process, but those kind of tools allow enterprises to be able to really take more control over their environment. I think when you buy a piece of software from a vendor, you are basically using an off-the-shelf product. You kind of have to some degree live with that product as it is. And while that fits a lot of needs, sometimes if your core business is built on the features and the customizations on top of that, then sometimes open source can provide you with a more flexible platform where you can actually have more say in the development process of the platform, say in how that software is shaped going forward. And that's kind of one of the great things about open source is it's a bit more democratic than say a commercial piece of software. Not to say that either of them are wrong or that either of them are perfect, but I think there's a give and take there to be had, and I think they both have their place in the enterprise and in the space.
Paul, anything to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I think two different things, right? OpenStack and open source. I'll start with the open source one. I think what's most interesting on open source is it makes development happen faster. I mean, we build an awful lot of our product based on how can I take the best of what we have out there as open source, how can I build now a more complete, better product on top of that. Underneath our product, which is a scalable storage layer, we actually use Cassandra for metadata management. So it's a very efficient way. There's multiple other components that we use as part of the open source. It means that we can innovate in storage much quicker, much faster than ever possible before. We're a small startup, and we've been able to build a very scalable storage platform. And I think that's what's exciting about open source, is it's the combination of open source does not mean non-commercial. In fact, open source allows you to build better commercial offerings quicker and cheaper. And I think that's great for customers. I think the second on OpenStack, I think OpenStack is still evolving, but what you're finally, I think, seeing is OpenStack can actually be that orchestration layer that we were looking for, or CloudStack as an orchestration layer. People want their on-premise environment to kind of be managed just like a cloud service environment. And that's what's great about those products. I mean, vendors like I think everybody here has done integration into those products so that our products will work seamlessly into those environments and very easily. So I think that's the second thing that's exciting. I think it's still early, but I think, give it another year, and I think you'll see it as much, this will be a really good self-service automation layer. I think you've been working with some customers that are already there, but I think a lot more people will be in the year.
Dave, would you like to add something to that? Because you are integrating with open source with your solution.
Yes, it's really important, I think, as a core software developer to build your products in an open API way. We've been very diligent in terms of building components, building services, and building APIs and developer environments and stuff that'll integrate with other products, and so that they can basically take ArcGIS, our core technology that we've been developing over the last 40 years, and be able to integrate that into custom solutions for custom environments, and be able to leverage all of the interoperability standards and everything that's on the marketplace to allow customers to build whatever operations they need within their environment.
And what about the aspect of do-it-yourself? When it comes to open source solutions, most companies, their initial reaction is, "Oh yeah, I can do it myself," and then they realize that there's too much time and resources that they need to invest in that, and then they look for commercial. So I want to talk about do-it-yourself versus commercial solutions that are out there, just in general, without pointing out any specific one. So I'm going to ask Roberto to comment on that.
So that's a great question, because with APIs, you need to have authentication authorization. And some people try to do an auth server or an auth type of proxy for authorization for themselves. And they can pick components out there in all the places, but then you have to maintain it forever. Whereas with a product like ours, you just can get it, use it, the vendor maintains it for you, and you can go ahead and do it. So it's always, the consideration is what's out there that exists that you don't have to maintain completely forever, or what's the things that you can use from a vendor that can be supported for you forever if possible. And we certainly use open source things. We integrate with open source components, but it's an architectural thing. What can you do best yourself versus what can you buy from some people, or what characteristics you can buy from other places. So that's one example I want to usually give people about the auth server. And if people don't know what that is if you go to Facebook, you put your credentials in Facebook, and you want to go to another application, and you want to use your Facebook credentials, that's auth server basically doing it. Some companies want to use their own credentials. They don't trust Facebook to be their credential for authorization. So people want to use those kinds of characteristics that are very easy. With one place on credentials, you can go to multiple systems. Just one example.
Thanks. So for the last 45 minutes, we've been talking about cloud infrastructure options and which option is right for you. Everything from on-prem to cloud and hybrid in between. So now we have less than 5 minutes left. I want to give each of the panelists to have a last word, starting with Nate at the very end. on the infrastructure options and what companies should be looking at when they're building their or choosing their cloud infrastructure?
Sure. I think the things to definitely be looking for are how do you interact with that with your cloud infrastructure, and how do you interact with your hybrid cloud. It's the more consistent it is between your on-premise and your hybrid and your public environments, the easier time you will have in moving forward. And I'd say also, don't be afraid of it. There's a bit of a mind shift, in going to a more DevOps mentality, but it's very much worth it in the end.
Oh, I believe that people just need to look at what is the solution that they need. It's very simple, but really they don't need to look at private premise on something. They just need to understand what is the best solution that they need, what is the less investment that they have to do, and finding something that works for them, and hopefully having some platform that help them to do it very fast and in an agile mode.
Yeah, I would kind of agree with Nate. I think a huge part is look at that kind of ecosystem, look at the apps, look at the environment that you want to provide, see what apps could you actually run on-premise and in the cloud, so that you've got that flexibility that you could actually have. You can move your service up to the cloud if you want to, or you can move it back. So I think that's a very important aspect, and related to that, APIs and interfaces. So you should expect your infrastructure provider to provide some of those common sets of interfaces. We believe S3 is a standard interface for how storage is interacting. You should be able to run similar interfaces on-premise and have the ability to apps that are built on top of S3 to run up in an S3-related cloud service or on-premise. And so I think you've got to look at the APIs and the interfaces, because where the apps are does matter, and which the apps are, or which ones you're going to support.
Yes, that's a good point. I know within our industry, within the mapping and GIS and that sort of thing, the cloud has just opened a capability to really share data, share applications, share content management, collaboration, and everything. Really expand the investment of our customers just dramatically with minimum extra cost and no deployment risk. Basically, a transparent interface to take advantage of the cloud without having a huge investment or effort in making it happen. So I would say if you have vendors that are providing solutions to the cloud, look at what the risk is, look at what the cost benefits are and what it is to the organization. And that's really where I see the industry's going, because there is such a big advantage in the extra bandwidth, the extra capacity, the extra capabilities that the cloud delivers.
So under the context of there we go. Under the context of compliance and security, I would say three things come to mind. One is the transparency we've heard about, which is you don't necessarily know if your data lives in the cloud, lives on-premise, and having those same controls. So that's the first. The other one, which is brought up obviously, was performance as well, and ensuring that you can still perform at scale and at the levels you need to while maintaining those controls over your data. And lastly, along the lines of what we discussed with open source, really being able to potentially embrace open source, but also looking at total cost of ownership. Because just because you can build a solution doesn't necessarily mean that, for example, you have the right domain expertise or security experts, in-house to be able to make the right decisions based on the technology you have.
Roberto?
So for me, the cloud always been the new way of IT, the new data center, trying to figure out how do you solve new business problems. So it's not I got to go to the cloud. It's really what applications I need to run my business. The applications need to be connected. They need to be secure. Most of the applications are API based. So we attack the whole thing from the API. You got to secure your APIs. You got to manage your APIs. You got to monitor APIs. And the cloud is just another deployment model to what you have to do. You have to make many decisions, your storage, your security, your privacy, your geo. All those things are business level decisions that eventually come to IT, how the implementation is done.
Thanks. And lastly for me, it's when you're building your cloud infrastructure, doesn't matter if it's on-prem or in the public cloud, the key factors that you should be looking at are resiliency, latency, performance, scalability, expandability. Those type of criteria are key considerations. And once you have a hybrid implementation where you have some applications on-prem and others in the cloud, the integrations of those applications, the visibility, the management really become very important considerations. So with that, I mean, we're out of time. I would like to thank my panelists for taking time from their busy schedules to be here, and also the audience members for listening to this conversation. Thank you.